This episode of Tales from the Backlog is brought to you by listeners like you. Some personal heroes of mine like Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Zolgeek, Colby Moyer, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Jill, Kieran, ZNA, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., and many more have gone to patreon.com/realdavejackson. Kick me a few bucks to support the shows that we're doing here. I appreciate all of them very much, and you, listener, can be just like them. Once again, that address was patreon.com/realdavejackson. Any help and support is always appreciated, and you will have my undying love and respect. On to the show. Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog, a video games podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to talk about a game we played. My guest today is a friend of the show, returning from our Hitman series that we're working on together, professional interrogator Scott Danielson. Welcome back.
Hey, man. Good to be here. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Yeah, of course. Like I said, Scott's been a guest on both Hitman episodes of the show, Hitman 2016 and Hitman 2 and Hitman 3 in the future when we...
Forthcoming.
Yeah, forthcoming, yeah. But we decided to talk about a different game today. It is Silicon Dreams, cyberpunk interrogation, which is a text-based interrogation game developed and published by Clockwork Bird, which is a two-person studio, for PC, Mac, and Linux in 2020. Elevator pitches for Silicon Dreams. If you don't know what this game is, I have a real simple elevator pitch here. It is Blade Runner meets Papers, Please. So, Scott, I took the easy one. What elevator pitch do you have?
I was going to say, I think that's like, it doesn't get much more concise and distilled than that. I think it kind of nails it. So I decided to go in the opposite direction with a little bit of a wordier a familiar dystopian future narrative experienced from a not-so-familiar perspective as it unfolds over a series of lovingly crafted conversational puzzles.
Yes, exactly. And this is not a very long game. My playthrough took me 5 hours. Is that about yours too?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I think my total time was closer to 7. We've talked, I leave my game paused a lot. I also feel like I spent a lot of time reviewing information like mid encounter. So I think some of the encounters I probably spent more time with than like was necessarily intended, but I think 5 or 6 hours is probably a solid estimate.
Yeah, not a super long game, kind of a breezy little game here. Not breezy in some of the things that you're doing, but as far as playtime goes, the spoiler policy for this episode, as Scott said in the elevator pitch, this is a game that is text-based, conversation-based, story-based, decision-based. Lots of things that are easy to spoil. So we're going to talk about how this game works. We're going to set up the story, talk about how it's delivered, because it is delivered in a pretty interesting way. But we're not going to spoil what goes on in the story until the spoiler section, as is customary on the show. So for Silicon Dreams, I want to start with our kind of histories with the game. And before we start, I do want to say that the developer, James, one of the two developers, reached out and provided us with codes for this game. So thank you, James. And I guess I'll give my history first before I kick it to you, Scott, because I know that part of the reason you played this is because I asked you to come on and talk about it. But for me, I actually saw this game on a YouTube channel that I really like called First Five. This is the second game on the show that I've discovered through that channel that's made it to the show. The other one was Unsighted, and it was on one of those like indie hidden gem videos. That channel does a lot of videos like that, especially, this is a bit tangential, but they do a couple of videos about games to play from those itch.io benefit bundles, like the Ukraine bundle and the racial justice bundle. So if you have those bundles and you're overwhelmed, I recommend checking out First Five. It's a good channel. But I saw that video. I saw the pitch for this game, the Papers, Please meets Blade Runner. And I had recently just watched Blade Runner for the first time. So I was like, oh shit, put this on the wish list. And it sat on my wish list for a couple years because that's what I do. I put games on my wish list so I remember them, and then most of them are still there. But like I said, one of the developers reached out, provided us with codes, so I figured, hey, this is the time to play it. Now, Scott, part of your reason to play this is that I said, hey, I've got a code if you want to join me, but I have a feeling you would have said no if you weren't interested in the pitch. So what about the pitch interested you?
Yeah, definitely. I think I mean, so I was not aware of this game at all prior to you informing me about it. But I know you and I have talked about Papers, Please in the past. I actually didn't know that you had only recently seen Blade Runner for the first time, but
yeah,
we've had plenty of other conversations about loving, sci-fi genre media and cyberpunk type stuff.
Yeah.
And I think I've even talked about some of those kinds of games, off podcasts. So I think I think if it was not a game that seemed interesting to me, you're right. I probably would have passed, and I appreciate being given that option. But from pretty much from the get-go, cyberpunk interrogation, I was like, yeah, this seems like my jam. It's kind of thoughtful, a lot of reading, thinking. I really like, narrative games that kind of put you in positions to make tough calls, even though it absolutely makes me uncomfortable. I find them to leave me feeling very satisfied after finishing them, even if there is some of that discomfort. So from the get-go, it looked like it was right up my alley, and echoing you, thanks again to the dev for the codes. I had a lot of fun playing this one.
Yeah, so that's a good transition to talk about some opening thoughts here before we dive in. That elevator pitch, Blade Runner meets Papers, Please, was super interesting to me. That's why it went on the wish list and got on my radar in the first place. And I think this game fulfills that elevator pitch pretty well. I enjoyed the interrogation part of things, like the Blade Runner style stuff. And I enjoyed the Papers, Please style, like pressures that are put on you as you're making your decisions through the game. So I think this game is also treading in some well-worn territory sometimes, but you do have a really unique perspective on those things. So I came out of this like really, really positive. I enjoyed this a lot.
Yeah, I agree. It is it makes no attempt to conceal its Blade Runner inspiration and like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep inspiration. But I think it ends up feeling okay in that regard, and like we said, it puts you in sort of it gives you a seat in the theater to experience this story that I think a lot of the things that have so thoroughly trodden this territory before have less often done.
Hell yeah! So let's listen to some music. When we come back, we'll dive into the story. So in Silicon Dreams, this takes place in the year 2066 in San Jose, and you play as D0527, who is an android interrogation specialist, working for this big android production corporation called Kronos, and your job is to interrogate other androids issued by Kronos. They're Kronos androids that are displaying kind of problematic behaviors, and you are tasked with talking to androids who've maybe been exhibiting emotions that they should not be capable of exhibiting, or behaviors that are problematic, or behaviors that are violent sometimes, and sometimes in the kind of Blade Runner fashion, trying to determine whether someone is an android or a person. And that happens fairly early, and it happens a couple times throughout the game. At least one time, trying to remember without scrolling all the way down to my notes.
Yeah, so I was gonna mention something on that. Like, I tried not to look at too much in the way of other reviews of this game prior to this conversation, but I did just do kind of like a surface level like scoured to see, generally how people, other people who had reviewed it had received it. And one thing I noticed is that like that is the kind of shorthand that people jump to, is it's like the what do they call it, the Voight-Kampff machine in
Right,
Blade
yeah.
Runner, right? And like it definitely it like fits that tone, but like I don't think it's an unfair spoiler or anything like that to say that like it's not predominantly a game about determining whether or not someone you're talking to is a human or an android.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that does happen, but it is not like it's not all that.
Right. It's mostly interrogating other androids to determine the cause of some behavior that is not intended or something like that. So it's interesting. You might see the term interrogator and you might think that you're part of the police or something like that. And you're not. You work for this company and you're kind of checking up on the product, making sure that it's functioning the right way.
Closer to like an insurance adjuster role than it is like a law enforcement role.
Right.
And so, but I think what that like to lead out of that, like what is important about that is that it makes it opens up for a lot more complicated scenarios and a lot more
Right.
complicated decisions, right? So now all of a sudden it's not just like, are they human or not, but it's also like you have to decide based on the information that you can uncover whether or not you think what this person or android did was wrong, or and what consequences they deserve to face or not face because of it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this is this is your job. You're making judgment calls on what's going on. But you're not like Judge Dredd here. You don't have the final say in what's going on. You're filling out a report based on your interrogation. So as you play, you're going to talk to lots of subjects. Number one, about the reason that a complaint was filed. Talk to them about their history. Talk to them about their memories, their emotions. And a lot of what you're doing is paying attention to how the androids feel about what's going on. So they're going to give their side of the story for whatever the complaint was. Let's say that there's a complaint that an android was menacing a person, or that it, attacked a person or something like that. You're going to try and get their side of the story about what was going on. Then you make the call on what to do afterwards.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe a good a place where it would be worth kind of talking a little bit about like how the interface works and how you experience the game. So you kind of like the game begins and the entire thing is sort of experienced from like a first person point of view of your character through like kind of scenes that like fade to black and then open back up at the beginning of each encounter, right? And for a lot of those, you're like for the interrogations themselves, you're sitting at a desk and you have like a kind of a hollow screen monitor that has, is logging the conversation you're having and is how you kind of navigate the dialogue options and stuff like that, and has kind of like a recap of what the case is and what you're here to find out. But then on the right side of the screen, there's like a couple of like screens and like camera screens, right? And that give you visibility into the room where your subject is. And like the art style is not super complex. In fact, I think one of the testaments to the writing of this game is that everything else is so stripped down that the writing like kind of has to carry it, and I think does so pretty well. I think the writing had a heavy load to bear and did so well.
Yeah.
But so you're kind of, there is this inherent distance between you and the subject, but at the same time, like part of this interface is like like an emotional readout. So you have kind of like 6 different emotions. I think they're fear, anger, sadness, joy, surprise, and disgust, maybe.
Yep.
And like you're kind of monitoring their emotional reaction to the things that you're saying and the things that they're saying, and kind of trying to incorporate that into how you are trying to untangle, what's going on with each encounter.
Yeah. Just to touch on the writing for a second, I totally agree that you're not getting a lot of other visual information about the subject. You've got a screen that shows their eyeballs, so you can like see if their pupils dilate or something like that. I never found that to be the most useful. The emotional readouts are useful to see, of course, but it's just looking at levels of emotion from 0 to 100 or something like that. So that's just information. All the personality and everything is coming through in the writing, and I think they did a good job of not only making the writing interesting, but also making the androids distinguishable from each other in the way that they speak. Or like, if you showed me writing from the game right now, I couldn't tell you who said it. I might have a list of like 3 or 4 possibilities, but there are different, classes of androids. So you've got one that's like a streamer, and it's like, kind of an online personality. And so that writing is different from like a security android or something like that.
Yeah, somebody who cares for an elderly person or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that stuff is really good. I really enjoyed that. So that interrogation interface, what you're doing is you're mostly picking questions from this list of topics, kind of like mind map style, and then reading how they respond, but also paying attention to their emotions when they respond. So at the beginning of each interrogation, you get kind of a dossier and a report to fill out that has specific things that you need to try to elicit from them. So speaking about emotions, like, of course, you need to find out information. Like, let's say this android did something bad. You need to find out why. But also, they're going to ask you questions about, like, can this android feel joy? Because this model is not supposed to feel joy. Maybe that's a bad example. I think they can all feel joy. But, like, this model is not supposed to be able to feel anger. Can they feel anger? If they can, there's a problem. So you need to try to elicit anger from the android. So it's not just like a police interrogation trying to find literal just information. You're also trying to provoke emotional responses out of them too.
Yeah, it's definitely like an emotional manipulation thing, which like most of the time doesn't feel good.
Right.
And as you play, you get access to other ways of provoking those kinds of emotions too, right? Where like you can start to control things inside of the interrogation room, where like you have a little button that will like engage or disengage like the wrist restraints, which you can use to like induce fear or whatever. And so like if you ask a question, the interface will kind of let you know if the subject is kind of hiding, like has more to say on this, but isn't in the right emotional state to do so, and give you a little hint of what emotional state you might try to provoke in order to get them to open up, but is not necessarily super clear on like how you do that. So you kind of have to like pay attention to what is it that angers them, and like follow lines of questioning about that.
Right.
If that's what you're trying to provoke or whatever.
Right. So you go through your interrogations. You try to fill out your report. There's usually like different goals on the report. You need to find out some information. You usually have to figure out something about their emotional capabilities. And then you also usually need to find out if their kind of internal systems are running the way they should. Is their memory functioning correctly, et cetera, et cetera. So once you have all that, you can fill out your report, and then you make your judgment at the end, which is to either decommission, kill them, send them to maintenance, which wipes their memory and then sends them back out into the workforce, or just release them. So these decisions are difficult in themselves, but there's another complicating factor, which is that for most of these interrogations, your company, Kronos, has some kind of goal from the interrogation too. So this is where that papers, please thing comes in, because you are obviously going to try to do what's right, but you have pressure from the company to do what they want you to do, and that doesn't always line up.
Yeah, so you respond to these questions in like multiple choice form, right? Like there'll be a field and you click it and there's a little drop down and you get to choose from a certain number of options, which correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they only show, like, they're not all visible, like, at the beginning. Like, a lot of times a possible answer will only show up once you've covered that ground in the interrogation.
I think so, yeah.
And then you make this recommendation, and then when you like confirm your selection, the encounter ends and the screen goes to black, and then it opens back up, and there's like a almost like a post interrogation like scene after each one that kind of has you back in like your sleeping quarters or whatever, and you pick up this little tablet, and it shows you kind of like how you did, and
Yeah.
you have a company score which can be docked points or awarded points, I guess, for every incorrect or correct like answer to the questions. But then also like a much bigger, usually by a much bigger amount, based on whether or not your final like judgment is in line with what Kronos wanted or would have done based on the information available. And so you're kind of you end up kind of constantly walking this line, like in Papers, Please, where like you if you let your company score fall too low, like you're an android, you are also, you know, at risk of ending up on the scrap heap, as I think they call it a few times. And so you're kind of constantly trying to like do the right thing while also not like get decommissioned yourself. And it's a really interesting line to walk.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, and it did put that kind of fear in me as I was playing to not cross Kronos. Like I definitely played probably the first half of the game pretty straight-laced, like good employee, because I was kind of afraid of what would happen. And then I got to a point eventually where I realized my company score is high enough that I can experiment for a couple of, you know, people and see what happens.
To go rogue.
Yeah, for a couple people. And then if it drops down too low, then maybe I'll reassess. So I actually don't know what happens if your score gets super low. Like it's out of 100 and mine never got below like 65 or something like that.
So this is interesting. I think this is where our game plays like the first way in which our playthroughs differed greatly.
Yeah.
I don't have, I think, a ton of like super harsh criticisms of this game, but I think one of the things I once I kind of got a few encounters in and realized like, okay, I understand what I'm trying to balance here. You know, to invoke, you know, the kind of template we've been referring to, Papers, Please. And of course, Papers, Please had the luxury of each encounter being much shorter. Like they're just like rapid fire, whereas like you're going to spend 20 to 30 minutes on each of the encounters in Silicon Dreams.
Right.
But I almost felt like the first few of them didn't, I wasn't given enough time or enough time to like get to settle into a loyalty to Kronos. And so like my first few like got me some negative scores. And so I spent like the first half of the game pretty low.
Did you? Okay.
Which is kind of how I was looking through like the full list of decisions I made as I played through earlier, and realized that like it kind of maps out kind of funny because of that, because of the things that I had to do later in the game to avoid like getting decommissioned. But something I'd never had access to. I mentioned that button that activates the wrist restraints.
Right.
There was another button that I got the impression kind of let you either play music or change the lighting or something.
Yeah, it so what Scott's referring to is you can kind of manipulate the environment to try to draw out certain emotions. So if you want to induce fear in the subject, you can turn the lights off and it will play like scary monster sounds. If you want to elicit joy, it will put on this nice lighting and play like bird sounds in the background, or like more peaceful. And I didn't know that it was tied to your company rating. So you didn't have access to this the whole time?
Nope. Like, okay. So every time I'd hover over it, it would just be like, raise your company score to unlock this feature or something like that. And I don't think, I ended up kind of like riding the first half of the game pretty low, and then kind of doing some weird stuff in the middle just to like regain some stability. And then kind of, you know, as I swooped towards the end, probably did some things that Kronos wasn't too keen on. But I don't think there was ever an encounter where I had access to it.
Interesting. So you felt the pressure then to increase your company score, and I'm guessing make some decisions that you thought may not have been the right thing to do, but what you had to do then?
Yeah. And I think it's less that like the I think what felt uncomfortable to me was less the fact that I was then put in a position to make those hard choices, because I think that's kind of what the game's all about. But like in Papers, Please, I it's been a while since I played it, so like, don't add tales from the backlog on this. But I was given more time to settle into the expectations that came with what the game initially presented itself as
Hmm.
before the kind of twist reveal of like, oh, there's something bigger going on here came
Hmm.
in to complicate those decisions. Whereas like in this one, like right away, I felt like empathy for the first like android, for the very first android that you like have to interrogate. It's
Hmm.
not it's not a particularly complex, like emotionally complex encounter to start you off, to its credit, but like it appealed enough to me, the human player's empathy, that I was like, yeah, like I'll like clear. I understand that Kronos wants me to like do this thing, but I'm gonna do this thing.
Hmm.
And I think in hindsight, like if I don't know, and maybe it's a me thing, right? Like maybe I didn't suspend my disbelief enough or whatever, but like right off the bat, I felt no obligation to do right by Kronos
Right.
until I discovered that like my life was on the line.
Right. I think that, that's an interesting way for the game to kind of set you on the track that your character would probably be feeling like they need to be on too.
Yeah, and I guess maybe if there had been what I'm suggesting here, where like you have more time to settle into that, then like maybe our playthroughs wouldn't have been as dramatically different as they I think are.
Right.
So maybe it is a good thing that like you kind of are forced to pick a side right away, for better or for worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So like in my playthrough, like I said, I spent most of the game in Kronos's good standing until the end, when it was kind of too late for my company rating to drop too much. And there were a couple times like kind of mid game where I was like, oh, I've got some breathing room here. I can kind of do what I want to on this one. And it dropped my rating down, but it's not like you lose 60 points for one interrogation. So sometimes maybe I felt like I had too much leash, but maybe it was because I was such a loyal soldier for the first half of the game that I do think it's interesting that you tried to like express yourself at the beginning of the game, and Kronos was like, no, you don't. You're going to fucking fall in line.
Yep. Yeah, and I think I'm realizing there's a very kind of amusing way, in kind of a morbid way, that came back to bite me, that I think is probably best saved for like after spoiler wall. But
Sure.
yeah, you're right. It is like there was something uncomfortable to me about the way that I always felt like I was understanding how to manipulate the game systems, like one step behind where I could actually use that knowledge.
Uh-huh.
Um, and the longer I've like sat with it, the more that started to feel like actually maybe the point, like kind of like a good design decision,
Uh-huh.
where it's like, because that's how real life works, right? Like the design of the conversation of the dialogue trees is going for a very like, it doesn't want, within an encounter, it doesn't want you to think of it like a game, like a narrative maze. Like they want you to feel like you're talking to a real human, right? And
Hmm.
like so when you use a dialogue option, you don't get to reuse it. Like if you click on it again, it'll just take you to the transcript where that answer is.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
there are sometimes dialogue options that are just different phrasings of a question that that your subject has already answered. And if you ask them that, they will respond like that. They'll say like, didn't we already talk about this? Like,
Yeah.
and maybe if you got to piss them off, that's one way to do it. But
Right. There's also a couple of times when like this isn't like a dialogue tree in like an RPG, like a Planescape Torment or Divinity Original Sin, where you get to exhaust every single option. A lot of times that's A, not necessary, but B, not possible. A lot of times, because if I found sometimes where I would go down some route of conversation and I would have a branching conversation option. If I pick one, then we'll exhaust that end of the branch or whatever. And then that conversation's over. And then if I tried to revisit it to see what they say to the other thing, you can't. Like you said, it will take you back to that transcript. So you are actually picking how to respond to what they say. If you want to be a dick, you can be a dick. If you want to take their side, you can take their side. But you can't often do both of those. So there's a little bit of role playing within those conversation trees as well.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that I think the writing does really, really well in this game, is like a point of friction that I feel like I've felt in a lot of like dialogue heavy games is there are a couple of ways that they can present you with options. They can like sometimes the thing you click on, right? If they show you like 3 different options and you click on one, sometimes what you click on is the text that you click on is like the dialogue that your character will say. It'll be like in quotes, and then you'll click it, and then your character will say exactly those words out loud.
Right.
And sometimes it'll be like kind of a interpretation of what they might say, or a shorthand of what they might say. And sometimes they'll literally say like, be mean, be nice, be like, and that's very helpful, but not super immersive. And so I feel like sometimes it's really hard to write dialogue choices that are clear about how they'll be received before you click on them. Yeah, because there's nothing worse in a dialogue game than the feeling of thinking you're clicking on the nice option, and then your character says it like an asshole, and you're like, wait, exactly. It's like I thought I was gonna. You click like, what did you mean by that? And your character's like, what the fuck? Exactly. What did you mean by that? What do you right? It's just like that's not what I meant to do. And then like especially in the kinds of games where you can't walk it back or go explore the other option, which this definitely isn't. You feel like you got like trapped into a route you didn't want to go down. And I think that in this game, when you read the dialogue options that you're going to click, they are by and large like they end up hitting the way you thought they were going to.
Yeah.
Or at least so that's how I found it.
Yeah. I always felt like I knew, like you said, I knew exactly what I was going to ask. And like you said, also, if I was paying attention to the subject, I had a good understanding of how they were going to react to that. Now, sometimes they don't react the way you expect because they're, it's realistic. It's good writing. Sometimes you ask a question that seems innocent and it brings up some memory that you haven't explored yet, and they get pissed off, or they get surprised, or they get sad, or something like that. So it really was fun to kind of puzzle out not only how do I get them to trust me so they'll answer the questions, but how do I elicit the right emotions so I can fill out my report? And then if you are role-playing as well, like, do I want to be a hard ass about this? Or how can I get this done while still being empathetic and respectful? Because that's how I tend to role-play.
Yeah, I think right off the bat, the fact that the game wants you to make those choices is obvious because, at the beginning of each encounter, you kind of have a period of time before like the conversation has started where you get to like review the dossier and look at the questions that you're going to have to answer or whatever. And then you choose, like, you click the button that like establish link, let's start the conversation. And I think almost every single one presents you like with the opportunity to say the first thing and gives you a choice of like, this is why you're here, you're in trouble, or like, good afternoon, Mr. Jackson. Like, how do you know why you've been brought in today? Like, you get to, and it's purely like a tonal thing. And I'm like, it probably influences that encounter, but like, it is mostly a choice about the kind of interrogation android you want to be.
Yeah. So during the interrogations, we've kind of alluded to this, but depending on how you approach things, different conversation topics will come up. There will be things locked off to you if you don't gain their trust, or sometimes it's like, it will say something like, this person does not understand the gravity of what's going on. They're not going to tell you the truth. So maybe you think I need to scare them so that they'll tell me the truth. If you don't do those things, you'll get locked out of some things. You might miss information. And then depending on what your judgment was at the end, your recommendation, there are many different outcomes for how these conversations and interrogations can go. it shows you a map afterwards, which I understand was patched in a little bit later into the game's life. So if anyone's played Detroit Become Human, where it literally shows you the branching paths, it's kind of like that, right? It's more of a mind map in this, and it will show you the subjects that you touched on in the conversation, as well as lots of blank things that you apparently didn't get to. And then it will show you the result of your interrogation. And I want to say that there's like 6 for each one, if I'm remembering all the little results.
Yeah, close to it. There might be some with a couple fewer, but
yeah,
many of them have a lot.
There's quite a few, and more than I would have expected from, like we said, a 2-person team, and writing out all these branching paths with different results that feel realistic enough to me that I appreciate the writing and planning and logistics that go behind like mapping all this stuff out. Because this is not David Cage with all the financial backing that he has. This is a 2-person indie studio. So I came to appreciate that. And like when we get into the spoiler section, I'm interested to hear how some of your interrogations went. And then the larger plot that's going on can also go in different ways, I think. So I'll be excited to dig into that a little bit later.
Yeah, I think it's interesting noting that there are like 5, 6, and maybe in some cases more potential outcomes, because like we talked about earlier, when you fill out your report, you only have like 3 recommendation choices. Like you can only choose like, so you would, I think like at first glance, that would make you assume, okay, well, there are maybe 3 possible outcomes for each encounter, which means that like the other outcomes like are a product of those combined with something that feels squishier that happens earlier in the conversation, or maybe even earlier in the game. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's interesting about the way that these dialogue trees are structured is that during the encounter, you don't necessarily know when a narrative path is closed to you. I mean, you do when like you ask a question and you're not able to get a response because of emotional state, and then you're not able to induce that emotional state before the end of the encounter.
Right.
You know that you've missed something there, but like it's not like there are like you're shown blanks during the conversation, so you know how much information there is to uncover.
Right.
And it's not until after each encounter that you like actually see what things that there were to find that you missed.
Yeah, that was always a shock to me, seeing that map at the end of every encounter and being like, wow, I thought I was really thorough with this, and there is so much that I didn't see here. Mm-hmm. So this game has a lot of difficult decisions to make, if you can guess from the way we've been describing what's going on here. So not only do you have difficult decisions just in the interrogation, sometimes someone will have done something bad, and you know in your heart they did something bad, and if you let them go, they might do something bad again, but they are a very likable person, for example. Or there will be times when Kronos says, we want you to decommission this android. We need you to make a report that, like, justifies decommissioning this android. But you talk to them and they didn't do anything wrong. Or they did do something wrong, but it wasn't their fault. Because, again, these are machines. So maybe there's a mechanical issue that caused them to do something. Lots of really difficult decisions throughout this game. And I think that this, number one, is a testament to the writing, that they write such like realistic, mostly likable characters. There are some that are not super likable, but like you still need to do your job. You can't just like kill all the ones you don't like. You might get in trouble for that. So lots of difficult decisions. I would say more often than not, I came out of an interrogation not feeling great about how it went, kind of regardless of what I chose to do, what I recommended.
Yeah, no, I think I would say the same. I think that they are all like there are almost none of them that allow you to get out of them without doing something that you aren't super into, whether that is the final decision or just like having to be a little mean to uncover some information or whatever. Like pretty much like not one of them is just like a nice pleasant conversation and then you both go on your way and live happily ever after.
Exactly. There's like some of them, like your report will say, can your subject feel fear and disgust at the same time? So you need to prod them in a way to elicit fear and disgust at the same time. And if you're talking to someone who you like, you enjoy talking with them, again, good writing. I enjoy talking with these characters. I feel like an asshole trying to elicit fear and disgust in some of these characters. So you're right. It's not just the final decision that gets you there. It's the all the little decisions you make along the way too.
Yeah, and I think and I don't know if this is an intended like mechanical consideration, but I felt like like we mentioned earlier, so when you go to fill out your report, the options you respond to each question with options from a drop-down menu, but the options that are visible are dependent on how your interrogation went. And I started to wonder if there was like a strategy in managing your kind of conflicting obligations or motivations in tactfully navigating the conversation so as to not create a record of particular information. You know what I mean? Like if you know that this person did a thing, but like you want to let them go, and so you can't have it on paper that they did a thing, could you get away with not putting them in a position to say that, letting them go? But then also, I felt like it was sometimes hard to tell which of those things would come back to bite you in the ass, because in your Chronos like post interrogation report, when you're docked incorrectly for things, sometimes it's like, sometimes you uncovered the information that proves that your report answer was incorrect, and so you're going to get dock points for that. But sometimes it's kind of implied that like Chronos does some kind of follow-up investigation to confirm your answers or whatever. And so I couldn't tell if there actually were places where I could like strategically get people like steer people away from admitting certain things for a certain benefit, and not have it come back to bite me in the ass. But it was an interesting kind of complication to at least think about.
Yeah, I kind of got the feeling, because you, like you said, you do get graded afterwards. I kind of got the feeling that you are like, you can try to tell little white lies on your report, but it felt like Chronos was going to catch it. So it didn't really occur to me to try doing that. When I wanted to lie on the report, I just lied on the report. And it gets into, now this was going to be one of my like critiques of the game from my experience, but since you tanked your company rating early on, it kind of solves the critique. But I found this game to be really easy to stay in the good graces of Chronos, despite spending the last half of the game kind of freelancing a little bit, doing what I felt like, while still kind of playing the game with the parts of the report that didn't matter, So if they would say, I'll get my easy points by saying, yes, the subject can feel anger, but when it comes to why did they do this thing, I will lie about that, using information from the reports, but it's not the real answer for why they did it. So I was going to say this game was too easy, and like since this is such an easy comparison to Papers, Please, that game's really hard to stay on top of everything. This one's a lot easier, and I think it was kind of intentional to try and get people to the end of the game. Like I don't know if it's even possible to fail this.
Well, think I don't know if I know the answer to that question, but I do think that like I had a negative company score experience, like a poor company score experience that you maybe didn't have at some point in the game. And I don't, you let me know when the right time to talk about that would be. But I think that like it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Where like while I was playing it, I felt like I wanted the sort of escalation curve of the difficulty of the decisions that you had to make to mirror that of Papers, Please a little bit more than it felt like it was. And now talking with you and hearing your experience, I kind of can understand why that first encounter was so easy for me to go against Kronos' wishes and like immediately begin incurring like negative company reputation. Because if it hadn't been, I think, regardless of how I played it, I would have ended up having that more of an experience like yours, right? Where like, I was able to build up so much company reputation that like then the choices matter less. Whereas like, because I succumbed to my own human empathy, my player empathy on that very first one, I felt like the game was a lot harder. Going through it.
That makes sense. I mean, it works the other way for me too. This is something that happens in real life when people are thought well of in the company. They get more leash than people who are brand new, or people who have made mistakes in the past, or people who they just don't like for whatever reason. So it's interesting that we had both experiences here, and I'm happy that turned out that way. I mean, I don't wish a bad or frustrating experience on your part playing. I don't even know if it was frustrating. Was it?
I think I've used phrases something like this a couple times already, but I think what I've come to realize is that what I thought felt frustrating, like when I first played through it, upon finishing it and sitting with it and reflecting on it, I think it was the right kind of frustration, right? Like it was intended frustrate. Like I think at the like when I first started playing through it, I was like worried that I was feeling frustration over like mechanics that weren't quite landing as intended or something like that. But now in hindsight, I feel like I was actually experiencing the frustration the game wanted me to be experiencing.
Interesting.
Which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think that's a hard thing to frustration's a hard thing to recommend to people. But
yeah, right.
Does it make it a good thing if it once you finished it and reflect on it, you feel okay about it?
Yeah. I actually this is going to be the topic of a future topic episode on the podcast about the value of frustration, being lost, tedium, things that are not fun in video games. So if everyone's interested in that, stay tuned. That's coming.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I had kind of the other, what I also feel like was an intended experience, where I start out towing the company line, being a good soldier, doing my job as they tell me to do my job. And then as I go, I start to realize like, hey, this is real shit. Like you're sometimes literally sealing people's fate here, whether they're innocent or maybe they're guilty, but not as guilty as it looks like they are. So I started to have doubts about how I was approaching some of these interrogations. And I look at my notes from the first, handful, and I'm thinking like, man, I could have done that differently. I had the leash and I didn't realize that I had it, or like maybe I did the wrong thing here. I made the wrong decision. And I really value that kind of experience too. So I feel like both sides of our experience are intended, depending on what path you take early in the game, whether you choose to rebel a little bit or whether you choose to be a good company boy like me.
Yeah, well, and I think it's interesting that feeling is so equated with like a I don't know, like almost a blindness, because the game, your perspective never changes. Like you're always the entire story is experienced from behind that desk and in front of those monitors. And so like, again, this is a place where the writing excels, is that like it fleshes out like a world out there, outside this building that you're sitting in and never get to see the outside of, that you feel is like real. but it also kind of comes to life in these conversations too.
Yeah, 100%. And so you will start to, like, through the conversations, start to get little inklings of things going on in the outside world. And we'll talk about those in the spoiler section, of course, but there are kind of greater things going on. And it manages to juggle teasing out that greater story while also keeping you focused on the reason that you're talking to that particular person. Again, the writing is just fantastic. Really well planned out game, I feel like, from that perspective too. And then, like, the minute to minute writing is really enjoyable and effective.
Definitely. You're right in that, like, the dialogue definitely keeps you engaged in the encounter, but like you always have that back burner that's simmering about what this greater story is that's going on. Because you know, I mean, we've hinted at it. I don't think it's any secret that something unfolds, and like it just does such a good job of like drip feeding you information about your role in it. And so like you're always kind of guessing at like how much you can influence it and how you think you want to influence it, and what choices you have before you and how they might help you have that influence on it. And so like it's, yeah, in hindsight, I think the way it keeps you in the dark about certain things actually is a lot more clever than I think I gave it credit for during the playthrough.
Yeah. This conversation's teasing out a lot of like things that have just now, fallen into place in my head, for sure. There are a couple other things that I want to mention before we get into talking about spoilers and stuff. It's like kind of a criticism. It's kind of unavoidable, I feel like, but sometimes they'll reference things that happened earlier or other. So you'll interrogate a character, and then like 6 characters later, you'll interrogate another character that is related to the first character. And this is cool. It makes it, so it shows relationship between the people that you're talking to. They're not just all nameless and faceless, but their names are, because they're androids, their names are a bit anonymous and hard
just
to
like
remember.
Alphanumeric characters.
Yeah, it's like, so like in hour 4, I really could not remember who AM-221 was, if they were brought up. And if I was not taking notes for a podcast, I would have just played and been like, I don't know who that is. I can't remember. And this game is very difficult to find guides and information for online. So had I not been taking podcast notes, I would have just been like, I guess I don't know who AM-221 is. And it's like, I'm not like mad about it because they're androids. Of course, they're products that are sold in stores. Some of them have like pet names or names that they've given themselves with permission from their owner, but it's just makes it a bit hard to remember. So I don't know if people want to consult my podcast notes. I could put them up for people so you can check who these people are. But I did find that to be kind of difficult.
Yeah, I think it in this regard, I think I spent a lot of time thinking about, we talked about it. I'm pretty sure you did an episode in fact, about Obra Dinn.
Not yet, no.
Not yet.
But we have talked about that.
But we have talked about it, which is a detective game, and it is a detective game that involves managing and sifting through a lot of information and a lot of very different types of information. Mm-hmm. And this is not an episode on that game, so I won't go much more into detail on that. But one of the things I think that game does really well is how it organizes and presents that information for you to work with. It makes it very easy to, it's doing a lot of cross-referencing and like, calling back to things, and it makes it does a very good job of putting all that information at your fingertips and making it easy to make those connections. And I think that's one of the things that this game could do a little bit better is it has a lot of data and information that is important to what's happening. And it is not always super easy to find it or to recall it or to like interpret it. We didn't get like super in depth on how it works, but I think that like the 6 axis like emotion meter is not super intuitive. Like it took me a couple of encounters to really wrap my head around like what it was doing and how to understand like what it was
Right.
telling me about what was happening.
Like what constitutes an android showing a certain emotion is not
Right.
super, because there were a couple in the first encounters where it was like, can they show these two emotions simultaneously? And it looked like they did, but they didn't. So
Yeah, and so like one thing the game does, which I do appreciate, is that like your interface has a tab that keeps a log of the interrogation that is visible until you end the interrogation, and each line of dialogue, there's kind of like a chart appended to it with columns for each emotion. And so like if you didn't understand what was happening on the emotion graph, or you need to like reference that information at some point later, you can go back to your chat log and scroll back and be like, oh, when they told me about this memory, they got plus 20 anger and plus 20 sadness or something like that.
right.
And I found that to be a lot easier to like parse in terms of knowing how to answer the report questions, for example, than like watching the meter in real time. And so to bring it full circle, I think like, you know, having one more tab that maybe like kept track of critical information from past cases that was always a bit like always accessible would have gone a long way. So like if you didn't remember who AM 122 is or whatever the number, you could like open up a tab and go check that.
Yeah.
But as it stands, I don't think you can do that from inside the encounter.
Yeah, I was going to ask you because I've done this in the past where I was like, why isn't there this mechanic? And someone's like, Dave, there was that. You just missed it. So I have done that.
Did I miss something?
No, I was going to ask you, did I miss a screen that showed you your past interrogations? But because I never found it and I was definitely wishing for it. The one thing I will say is there are a couple of characters that are more important than others. And those characters do have more memorable names, but then there are some that get brought up where it's like, you did this with JH422, and I'm like, I don't know who that is. And that kind of like numeric or the initials JH don't mean anything to me because it has nothing to do with who they are really. So for those characters that are named like that, I would have appreciated a kind of like past interrogation summary. This is who they were. This is what happened to them type of thing.
Yeah, because there's not even a ton of like character design. I mean, I think there's kind of like a relatively low poly like headshot on each dossier, but like the NPC like model that you can see on the screen in the interrogation room is like pretty low fidelity and like they're not really distinctive. So, you know, you can't really differentiate them by that. Right. To my knowledge, no, there is no like, other than that like post encounter screen that shows you the map. There's no way to kind of go back, with the one exception. And I'm realizing now this is like a mechanic we didn't talk about at all, but in addition to your interface's dossier tab, conversation log tab, and then like dialogue tree tab, there's also like an email inbox tab. Yeah. And there are a couple of encounters that sometimes involve like incoming emails, or you'll get incoming emails that, you know, I got a lot of them. You probably never saw one of these, but like if your company score drops below, I think 20 out of 100, you get like on a particular encounter, then in that like right before bedtime, like score report scene, you'll get like an email that's like, further poor for performance will result in disciplinary action or something like that.
Nice.
And so you can kind of like go back and find key moments from the story, like in your inbox, but not so much as to like uncover like, or to remind yourself who a specific character was necessarily.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's interesting that you get emails for the company reminding you that like your life is in danger if you don't shape up, because you don't get emails praising you if you're doing well. So little corporate dystopia on
just in real life.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we get into spoilers? I think that I've kind of said the basic explanation, and then kind of the no spoiler breakdown of how our conversation went. One more thing. The music in the game, we've talked about the way it looks, the game, but the music is kind of laid back, like background music style, but I did enjoy it. So I want to shout it out as like, it's not intrusive. It's got a couple melodies that stick with me throughout the day, but enjoyable music. And, you know, when I hear music that I enjoy, I want to shout it out.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And I think, you know, like we said, it's for a game that's so light on sort of visual dynamism, and, you know, kind of other sort of showy complexity, like the writing definitely, you know, pulls its weight. But the music absolutely is like a solid foundation. I feel like it's really chill and like very ambient. Like it made it easy for me to like put on big headphones and block out everything else. But it also kind of like has cool. I don't know if they were like sound effects or like if the music actually changed, but I felt like there were sound cues when things got intense or when you suddenly learned a piece of critical information that also kind of made it easy to stay engaged with the story that was unfolding too.
Yeah. When you have a game like this with as much reading as it has, a game that is centered on reading, the music has to take a back seat. Otherwise you'll get distracted. And I think that the music did its job for sure.
Yeah,
so
definitely strikes a good balance.
Yeah. So was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we hit spoilers?
No, I don't think so. I think the only other things that I had written that I specifically wanted to talk about are probably best saved for after the spoiler wall. But
okay.
Yeah, I think it was a solid game, and again, appreciate the developer for hooking us up, and I'd pay full price for it. I think it's worth the time and the money to if kind of narrative heavy detective investigation type games are your jam.
Yeah. So I was just going to ask, like, what kind of gamer would you recommend Silicon Dreams to? And so the type of person who would enjoy like a real text heavy kind of puzzle-ish conversation game. The entire story plays out through the conversations that you have and the kind of post-interrogation reports, basically. There's really not a whole lot else going on. And then, of course, if you're pissing off Kronos, then you'll get angry emails from them to kind of drive that home. So I would recommend this to fans of the elevator pitch. If you played Papers, Please and enjoyed it, and if you watched Blade Runner and enjoyed it, I think you'll enjoy this. It's got good parts from both of those. You have to be up for reading. There's no voice acting, and it is like, I don't even want to say it's 99% reading. It's all reading, 100%.
It
reading,
is
conversations, asking questions, stuff like that. So if you're in for that, and if you're in for the kind of uncomfortable situations that your job will put you in the game, then easy recommendation. I really enjoyed this.
Definitely. And it's one of those games that like won't take up a ton of your time. You could sit down and play it in a sitting on a Saturday afternoon if you wanted, if you have the emotional resilience, I guess.
Yeah, that is true. I do have a lot of time to play games, as evidenced by the fact that I do a podcast where I beat 3 to 4 games a month. I do have a lot of free time, but I did find myself wanting to play this in like 45-minute chunks at maximum. Because I did feel like, that was a lot. I need to play something else right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel we started out right off the bat. We said it's like 5-7 hours tops, and I think most of those games I'll play in 1 or 2 sittings, maybe. I think I played this one in 8 to 10. Like, like I don't know that I ever sat through more than 2 and maybe 3 encounters in one sitting. Because it's not. I don't know. It's one of those kinds of things that you just feel like you need to digest before you dive into another one.
Yeah. It's not like you feel gross about what you're doing or something like that. But it is, if you are invested in what's going on and you're invested in the characters that you're talking to, then there are going to be situations where you're not super comfortable with what you did. And maybe I don't want to go into the next interrogation and do another uncomfortable thing right now. I'll wait until tomorrow. Okay, that kind of thing.
Because like we said, it's not, it's not just a series of figure out whether or not this person's a human or an android, but it definitely does hit hard on those themes of like, what does it mean to be human, or to be to deserve autonomy, and to and so it leaves you with a lot of like big heady stuff to chew on, even after you set it down and walk away.
Yeah. 100%. So very enjoyable game. Again, thank you to James and Clockwork Bird for providing us with the codes. But as I said before, this was already on my radar. It was on my wish list. It was just going to be a matter of time before I finally bought it and played it. And I do recommend that a lot of people give it a shot. So little housekeeping here before spoiler time. To support Tales from the Backlog, the best ways to do that are the best ways to support any podcast by going on your favorite podcast platform and leaving a rating and review. It's really helpful. You are more than welcome to join the Discord server, come in and chat with some cool people. I would love if people played this game, number one, and then came into the Discord server and shared their experiences, because as Scott and I are going to get into in the spoiler section, you can have different experiences with it. So we would love to have you. We have a very cool and supportive group of people in the Discord server. It's a good time. If you want to support monetarily, there is a Patreon page. There's a link down in the show notes. $2 a month gets you voting rights on episodes of the show, bonus episodes, lots of cool treats, my undying love and respect, all of that stuff. I also do another show called A Top 3 Podcast, where each episode is usually a top 3 list, sometimes other fun list-related activities.
Shaking that one up lately, huh?
Yeah, we did. We're evolving on top 3. That show is a good time. If you want to hear me talk about things that are not video games, that's the place. So Scott and I are going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about the spoilers for Silicon Dreams. All right, I'm back. Scott and I are going to break down the spoiler wall for Silicon Dreams. So if you have not played Silicon Dreams, get out. We're going to spoil it. And we're going to spoil what happens throughout the greater plot right now. So we're not going to go chronologically with the big revelation at the end. Here it is. Get out. You've been warned. So as you play through Silicon Dreams, as you go through the interrogations, you start to realize that the greater plot is about robots wanting their own freedom and autonomy, which is, like I said at the very beginning of the episode, well-worn territory. But two things that I think made this interesting before we talk about how it ended for us. Number one, you get to choose what role you take in it and any role that you want to take. But unlike something like Detroit Become Human, you are never going to be on the front lines of this revolution. You are never going to be the one in the streets holding the flag or whatever. You are in your interrogation room or you're in your sleeping quarters and it all plays out around you. I think that is what takes frankly, what I think is kind of a tired storyline and makes it into something that was unique for this game. The fact that you are just seeing it through conversations and then news reports at the very end.
Yeah, definitely. There's I don't know that we mentioned it, but in that like post encounter scene in like your bedroom each night before you go to bed, there's like a little like news television that like I don't know how varied it gets, but I did notice that like it usually just shows you like one screen or something with like a headline, but usually the headline's like related to something that just happened or happened in the previous encounter, and it kind of reflects like your role in it. But I think it's also interesting that like you can't, no matter how you choose, what role you choose to play, you decide you want to play in this plot. The game doesn't let you be 100% that. Like you will still have to make choices that go against that in order to keep all of the different like incentive structures in balance,
right?
To keep the game going, right?
Yep. And there's one kind of encounter later, as I think it's like right after you've started to be introduced to this plot, where you start to realize, oh, there is going to be an uprising. There's a plot happening now. And then you get thrown right in and you are being interrogated, which was a shock to me. And they say, this is routine. We do this from time to time, but the timing of it felt perfect with what was going on in the greater plot. And also because I had just started breaking the rules. So in my playthrough, I went into my interrogation or my performance review, as they call it, a couple interrogations after I started to think, you know what, fuck Kronos. I'm going to start facilitating quietly, but also I'm going to start making the recommendations that I feel are correct. And then they were like, all right, you're in the chair now. And I was like, oh shit.
So when did that happen? Was that was towards the end of the game for you? Like maybe 3 or 4 encounters away from the end? And
it was the second to last encounter.
Okay. So I think that's what I was referring to earlier when I said that I potentially had a fail state encounter that you didn't have. I didn't realize that was like gonna be there as like part of the plot, no matter what, because it happened. I think after like at the moment my company score fell to the lowest it ever was. Like it was the first time it fell below 10.
Okay.
I spent a lot of the game between 10 and 20, and you get like that email when you're sub 20 that's like, turn that shit around or else you're going to be punished. But that was the first time that I actually dropped down to like below 10, like to a single digit score. And I assumed that I was thrown into the chair because of that and not because I had reached the right point in the story.
Interesting. So was it also the second to last thing for you too?
I think so. I think it was the third to last. So I was looking at your notes. And so talk me through like your the last two encounters, not counting the one where you were in the chair.
Okay. So in like the fourth to last encounter, you get a message from this revolutionary named RO334 that just says, you want to be a part of this, sit back, wait for further directions. And then the next encounter was this guy named Reynold Adder, who's a human. We didn't mention in the non-spoiler part, sometimes you do interrogate humans. And this is the former owner of RO334. And then after that, I was in the chair.
Right. Okay. And so then the next encounter was your last one. And what was that?
That was RO334.
Okay. So I had an encounter after that I don't think you had.
Interesting. Okay.
So
sweet.
So RO334, and I it seems like we might be spoiling things kind of in backwards order here. But like we're into it now, right? So RO334 is an android that was granted like his own autonomy and to maybe up for a debatable amount of illegality, was also aided by, what was his name? Reynold?
Professor Adder.
Professor Adder, in kind of achieving that independence and, the aesthetic augmentations that would allow him to escape being recalled or whatever. And when he comes and he sits in the chair, he kind of encourages you, before the recorder comes on, like just everything's going according to plan. Just pretend this is a normal interrogation. So you kind of proceed as normal. And as it unfolds, it becomes clear that, actually, I also think that this one unfolded differently for us. So why don't you tell me how this one unfolded for you?
With Professor Adder or with RO334?
No, with RO334. So so at a certain point, he like pulls back the curtain and is just like very open about the fact that he is the revolutionary and that the plan is about to be set in motion. How did that go for you? Okay.
So I guess we're not going too far out of order because we can kind of walk this back and talk about what led to this too. But there is kind of an android uprising coming. You find out RO334 is the leader of this uprising. At this point, I was interested. This kind of like breaks the immersion a little bit, but I started to think this is a video game. the more interesting thing to me is to follow the uprising plot and see what's going on. So I'm going to play along with RO334. So if this was real life, probably not, but we'll see. Anyway, talk with RO334. We find out the Revolution is only 3 androids at the time. So it gives you a little false sense of like, oh, this shit's not going to work. And they say that their plan is to release a video of some kind. And what it actually is they're releasing a video seems to just be the best format to transmit what they're doing, but they're transmitting all these memories of people being cruel to androids. So it's emotional data being transmitted via a video of cruelty, abuse, all kinds of stuff.
The way, I don't know if you played like Cyberpunk 2077, but the way that I kind of read that was like the brain dance thing from that game, which is like it lets you live memory, like relive a recorded memory, but like with like full sensory like experience, right? Gotcha. So what they're like hoping to do is like broadcast these memories, and he keeps calling it a video, but I think the intent is to get all the androids to feel what these mistreated androids have felt in order to like build solidarity.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So he is going to transmit this data, basically, make everyone feel this, and then hopefully turn people onto the side of the revolution. So in my interrogation with him, he wanted to be decommissioned, and so killed in Silicon Dreams speak. He wanted to be decommissioned, and I thought that he wants to drum up extra support by becoming a martyr for this revolution. He says that once the video goes out, there's nothing left for him to do. His job is done. Now he wants to be killed to embolden everybody in the uprising. That's what I thought. That's not what happened, though. So is this playing out how it did for you?
Yes, but I think this is where it stops, because he told me what I think he didn't tell you about what happens next.
Okay, so he definitely did not tell me what happened, because maybe I was being more standoffish toward him and didn't gain the trust or something. But when you decommission the androids, they electrocute them to death. So he, turns out, had an EMP on his body. So when you electrify him, it causes this massive electrical surge that knocks out all the Kronos like security systems, cameras, radios, everything. And that opens the door for these androids that have been turned to the side of the revolution to storm the building, basically.
So I am curious to know, and I don't know that either of us know the answer to this, but like whether my experience was a result of how I played this encounter, or if it was a result of how I had played previous encounters, or both. Mm-hmm. But basically, so the if memory serves, like I think you get like an email, you get emails throughout that encounter, like from Kronos, like PR being like, oh no, like what's going on, like because the video is being uploaded and sent out during the encounter, right? Mm-hmm. And so like, as you're talking to RO334, I don't remember if there's actual sound effects of like crowds, but like there is like a ramp up in the music, and you get the sense that like it's working. People are experiencing this video. They're taking to the streets. They're outside the building right now while you're interrogating. Mm-hmm. And then this EMP goes off, and it's like supposed to like let them in, right? It's supposed to give them an edge to like take over.
Right.
And for whatever reason, because of the choices I had made before, he told me that that's what was going to happen. Like he told me he wanted to be decommissioned, and I was like asking him about why, and he's like, all right, here's the skinny. Like I have this thing in here, and like there's nothing left for me after this anyway. So like use this, like slip out in the chaos, or whatever. Mm. Like it almost seemed like he thought knowing that would help me.
Okay.
But then it ended the same way. I did decommission him. The EMP did go off, and the blackout happened.
Interesting. Okay. So let's put a pin in that, mm-hmm. and let's work backwards. Let's start over from kind of the beginning and work back up to that.
Hold on. Before we do, what happened after that for you? Like, generally speaking.
I was labeled as a traitor by the revolution. They came and knocked on my door, and they captured me and told me that they were going to torture me by shaving down my brain to the capability of a sentient husk.
And this is like they kind of like do like a little epilogue thing with some dialogue cards. Is this how they delivered this information to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know what choices I made prior that enabled this, but I actually had one more interrogation after that.
Okay.
And it was. Do you want me to talk about it, or do you want to walk back?
Let's walk back. Let's
okay.
Because the point that I wanted to make for anyone listening who didn't play this and is just listening because you want to know what happens, it sounds like we went 0 to 100 with no kind of build up, but I actually think this game does a really good job of building up to the revolution from your perspective of only being in your interrogation room.
Mm-hmm.
So you start by talking to androids that have, like, they've either been mistreated, or you start to get the tiniest inkling that something might be up. So an early android is named Shakira Barber, and you thought she was a human at the beginning, and that was a Blade Runner interrogation where you needed to determine if she's a human or not. And so the fact that androids are disguising themselves as human is one of the first clues that something greater is happening. And this is like
one of the first places where I where I was kind of forced into making a choice I didn't want to make, because so the first encounter, and this is like an elegant thing that I think I'm just kind of pieced together since we started this conversation, but like the first encounter is called is an android called Alex. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty straightforward. Like there is something wrong with Alex. Alex does need to be like serviced, but servicing an android wipes their memory, and Alex is afraid of that. And so like it's this most basic tension between doing your job and like you know they're an android, but they're just so likable. They're scared of losing their memory, right? And so like it was so elegantly designed that I succumbed to my human empathy, and I let them go, even though all of the like evidence on the report said I shouldn't, and immediately got like my score docked. And so 2 encounters later, when Shakira Barber shows up, and you start noticing things are going awry, is suddenly when you start to feel like you are getting a grasp on like the actual gravity of your decisions. Mm-hmm. And because of like how I started the game, right away I had to be making decisions I didn't want to make in order to keep things in balance. And so like I think Shakir is maybe the only encounter where you do actually have to start by determining whether or not they're an android or a human.
I believe so. Yeah.
And she is an android, and I went back and looked through like my outcomes earlier, and it seems as though I decommissioned her despite lack of proof. And so I don't know if there was enough proof in that to like prove that she needed to be decommissioned. Mm-hmm. But it felt like that's what Kronos wanted me to do, and like she's the first character that kind of seems to matter. And so like I don't know, did you decommission her, or did you like
so this is actually really interesting. She's one of she's the first encounter where there's some other supplementary material. So she has a diary that you can read.
That's right.
And it turns out there are some mysterious phrases in her diary that when you question her on it and when you say them in the correct order are a kill phrase. And she exploded in my interrogation. Wow. Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So that was really interesting to me for like the beginning of this greater plot. Number one, she is an android who feels the need to disguise herself as a human. She got plastic surgery, all that stuff. But number two, she felt like, I actually don't know how the kill phrase is coded, whether she set that up or if that's Kronos standard manufacturing policy. But she had a kill phrase and it was written in her diary. And I don't know maybe she wrote it in her diary as kind of a like, hey, if I get sent to the interrogators, I want to make sure these words are said so that I just die, basically.
I feel like I remember that encounter having an element of her not knowing. Like,
yeah.
Does it come back to her? Does it all come back to her or something? Because I feel like at the beginning of that encounter, she doesn't know she's like she genuinely thinks she's a human.
You know, as I got through that, I started to feel like maybe she was just saying that, but I couldn't say for sure. But to my knowledge, she's the only android that has a kill phrase. So that was interesting.
I didn't even find that. That's wild.
Yeah. But, you know, there might be more because like we said, there's 4 to 6 outcomes for a lot of these. And there's only so many outcomes when you take into account like decommissioned, maintenance, or released. That's only 3. So there's other stuff.
And in the case of some of the humans you talk to, it's like only 2 because you're not the cops, so you can't imprison them, and like you can't kill them. So
you're
it's
not
like
going to decommission a human, right?
Yeah, it's pretty much like release them, or I don't know. I'm not even sure what some of the other options were. But yeah, it's maybe there are. I'd be curious. I'll be curious to see people talking in the Discord about this game and see if I learn about any outcomes or endings that I didn't even consider would be possible.
Yeah. So that's the first kind of thing that I noticed playing through these interrogations. We're not going to go through all of them in detail, but that was the first one where I was like, oh, androids feel like they need to disguise themselves as humans and then also set up a kill phrase so that if shit goes wrong, they're put out of their misery, basically. And then you have a lot of other interrogations where it seems like you have a lot of interrogations where androids are feeling emotions that they should not be able to feel. So they're kind of independently developing this capability, regardless of their programming straight out of the box. And there's a lot like this.
Yeah, I think one of I don't know if it's the very next one but like shortly after Shakira Barber, there's one that I think you actually mentioned him in before the spoiler wall, but he's like a streamer android.
It's the one right after Shakira, yeah.
And it has this like really interesting tension between like you're representing Kronos, right? And like androids are technically Kronos property, and so like part of this investigation involves finding out whether or not like the owner of this android has violated their like user terms of service by damaging, right? Like what this android does is he like gets damaged on stream,
right?
And like it's kind of fucked up because like I think there's a little bit in there about his owner like having a custom like pain module installed so that he like could feel pain that he would not otherwise feel because it increases the views on the like Twitch stream or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, so like on one hand, you're trying to investigate like wrongdoing on behalf of the owner, based on like potentially having done damage or performed unauthorized modifications to the android. But then you're also trying to investigate like whether the android is functioning correctly and should like face consequences or be maintained or whatever. In addition to, you know, balancing all of those things in the bigger plot that's unfolding.
Yeah. That streamer android was a really interesting one because, you know, maybe an earlier android had experienced an emotion that was not supposed to be there, but it seemed incidental or like not super important or not, it didn't stand out in any way. Whereas this one, RL404, is like taking pleasure in the fame that it gets from these streams. And like one of its biggest worries as you're talking through like what's going to happen is that it's going to lose its fame. It's going to lose its popularity if it can't do these streams anymore, if it gets sent to a new owner, if it gets memory wiped and sent back. They're really concerned about losing their popularity. And I was like, this shouldn't be something that an android built to do a job should be concerned with. So yeah, it's a much more human side of the androids than like maybe the first one that you talked to. This is only number 4 in the game out of 15 or something like that.
Yeah, and I feel like there are a lot of the ones, like a lot of the encounters with androids that where the situation you're investigating like heavily involves that character or that android's owner, end up hitting on like they almost end up feeling like these like weird like Stockholm syndrome type relationships where it's like these androids are being mistreated by their owners and clearly
Hmm.
have like a some kind of like sadness or anger about that, whether they're supposed to or literally programmed to or not. But they also like frequently can't like bring themselves to say bad things about their owners, right? Like it's like that streamer is not just worried about losing fame, but like also like letting down his owner because it's a business that they run together, right?
Right.
And then I think there's like when you interrogate an android that's like an attendant to an old man, and he expresses like how much he hates the way this old man treats him, but also how like how much it saddens him and angers him how like unhelpful the state is to elderly people.
Hmm.
Um, I think there's a lot of heavy-handed in some cases like Blade Runner nods, and Android streaming Electric Sheep nods, but there's also some like really well written, poignant social commentary that feels modern, like currently prescient, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Actually, one of the more affecting Android conversations or interrogations, it's not an interrogation, actually, this one. It's called SM-115. And if you don't remember because of the naming, this one is the labor reassignment one. So it's not an interrogation. It's because their owner died and they need a new job. And it's your job to kind of pick what they need to do. And of course, there are a couple of variables. The android wants to be near the owner's grave, and the android has a particular set of skills. But the job that would match their skill set is not near their owner's grave. And so it sounds like it's not one of the most serious ones because it's like you're not deciding their immediate fate, but
It's like a butler that needs a new job. Like,
right. But you know that if you send them to the job site that they want to go to, it's going to be too hard for their the way their android body was constructed, and they're going to break down. If you send them to the job that they're suited for, they're not going to get their wish of being near their owner's grave. So you have to make the right choice. That one was oddly one of the more affecting ones, and a little cherry on top is I don't think I mentioned this in the non-spoiler part. Just don't think I got to it. But Kronos does not always honor your recommendation. So in that one in particular, I sent them to the good job site that was away from their owner's grave, but would ensure that they didn't break down physically. Kronos was like, nope, they're going to a construction site, and they broke down really quickly and died, and didn't get to be near their owner. So that one was like, fuck.
yeah, and it's weird because it's like by limiting the 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 big picture stakes because it plays such a small that encounter plays such a small role in the hidden plot that's unfolding over the course of the game. It almost makes you feel like you have more power in it than you do in any other encounter because it in the moment it feels like there's no way, like there's no reason for my decision to be overridden in this scenario because I'm simply deciding where this person goes. But
Mm-hmm.
you are choosing between you do have to be the one to make the choice between uh, whether to prioritize that android's happiness or the interest that Kronos has in making sure the androids do the thing that they're designed to do, which is like their job, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and then like it really, like you said, it really stings when you try to do when like it's going to make him sad, but you try to do the thing that's going to be best for like his well-being, right? You're not even making that choice because you are acting in Kronos' interests. You're making because you're acting in his interests, and they still fuck you over.
Yeah. Yep. It's real good.
It
That's
stings.
actually the interrogation where RO334 sends you the notice that says, stay tuned, basically, for what's coming. Another thing, kind of as we build up from an android disguising themselves as a human up to the eventual uprising, there are a couple of other androids that like feel like they're aiding like a hidden thing, like a hidden common interest among androids, but it's not quite starting a revolution yet. It's just this gradual buildup. There's a QA android who is kind of like a fake out. It's DS916. They are approving defective androids for production. I kind of got the feeling like this is, I don't know, they want more soldiers out on the streets or something like that, or they're knowingly going against their programming. If this is before the revolution plotline starts up.
Yeah, it almost feels like a civil disobedience kind of act.
Yeah,
right?
which is not something that should be possible in these androids.
But at the same time, doesn't feel immediately like threatening to Kronos. So like it almost feels like you can let this one slide.
Right. And it kind of just turns out that this android is feeling pressure to hit quotas, and that's why they're doing this. So this was another android, though, that was independently developing emotions that it shouldn't have felt. So we're kind of building up with that. Then the one after that is actually believed to be part of a network of rogue androids. So now we're starting to talk about rogue androids. This is AM221.
Oh, yeah.
So I couldn't get far enough in the conversations to like get real answers, but I did know that there was something coming. And by this point, I had had enough shitty decisions by Kronos or enough shitty situations where I was like, you know what? I want to see what this is about. So they ask you, my recommendation went against what I should have done, and I let them go. And they immediately, they're social workers, so they're working with, androids in tough situations and humans and stuff. So they immediately went out and started clearing cases of all androids that were like disguised as humans to kind of like free them up or something like that. And they immediately got caught. But as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, so there is something in the water out here. And it starts to build up from there to like actually talking about uprising.
Yeah. And I think this is where I started. So like I said, I'd gone back to look through all of my different like conversation webs earlier today. And something I noticed is that there's a lot more undiscovered information in like the last third of the encounters for me, because I think at least in part because of that thing I mentioned earlier, where I started wondering, like, are there things I should strategically not be asking about so as to not establish like a record of something? And so like, I felt like I there were a couple of places where I kind of just tried to like ask the bare minimum that I needed to put together a plausible report, and then like do the most like benevolent outcome I could. And I think that like right around this is the time that this encounter is the time when I started to like employ that strategy, trying to like strategically hide information from Kronos.
Nice. So this one is kind of like the stepping stone. Then you start to get this message from RO334. The next person you talk to is Professor Adder, who was RO334's former owner, who tried to give it its freedom. Legally, androids can never be free because they're Kronos property. But this Professor Adder is the classic human that is on the side of the androids, who thinks that they should be given all human rights and all of those things. So this is where, like, if it hasn't crystallized already what the rest of the game is going to be about, this was like, to me, it was like, oh, okay, something's coming. This is another, do robots deserve the same rights as humans type of story. And I need to figure out what side of it I'm going to be on.
And by now you're running short on time to do so.
Yeah. Yep. So we talked about the RO334 thing with the EMP, the storming of Kronos HQ, the fate of my character. My character was caught by the rebels, and you branded as a traitor because, well, I'll get into that. My character did not have a good ending. You said that after RO334 and after the EMP and the uprising, you had another interrogation. So what was that?
So after RO334 and the EMP, I can't remember exactly like what played out in between, and like I feel like there was some kind of like exposition screen or something like that, or however they like maybe another. You get a chance to look at the news report or something, but then the lights came up on the last interrogation, and sitting in the chair was Ava Blanchard, the CEO of Kronos Industries.
Oh, no shit.
And she and so at this point you're I can't remember exactly all the cues that like lead you to believe this, but I feel like this is something that is happening because of like the break-in, like the riot outside broke in, seized control of Kronos headquarters, and like put Ava Blanchard in the interrogation, and then like gave me the let me do the honors of conducting this interrogation, where
I see. Yeah.
I basically was given the opportunity to like force her to like admit, and I think there was maybe it was implied that maybe this was being live streamed or something like that, or like that the results of this interrogation would go public somehow, but like was basically able to like work her into a corner to admit that like she sees androids as being lesser than human and not deserving rights, and admitting to like abusing androids in the past, and like admitted to doing like shitty things out of corporate greed. And at the end of that, I was given the opportunity to either let her go or to execute her. And I chose to execute her, which looks the same. She like fries in the chair when you hit the button. And then you get that like title card sequence. And some of the key things that I think were unique to my ending was that the Android uprising was a success, and there was an Android state was established in, I can't remember if the setting is like given a name.
I think it's just San Jose.
Oh, that's right. San Jose. So like the you know, it almost has that feel of like at the end of a movie when they're like, you know, so and so went on to be a whatever. It's like that's kind of how the like epilogue exposition is delivered, and it so like there was an Android state established that kind of allowed androids to achieve some level of like autonomy within society, but it was kind of a mixed success, because the spectacle of me frying Ava Blanchard in that chair meant that there is a good population of humans out there who now are in an uproar and like are even angrier and more like prejudiced against androids because of the choices I made in that last scene, I assume.
Yeah. I would assume that if you let her go, there would be some more like goodwill extended toward the androids.
Yeah, I also like, but I think I had considered that, but I was also like, if I let her go, like, is the mob outside just gonna like tear her to shreds? Like, is this gonna happen either way? So I think that's like part, and also, you know, I'm an android.
Yeah,
and like
true.
Some of that last stuff like got me fired up. So I was like, fuck it. Let's let her fry.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I wonder how we arrive at this, because we both allowed this to proceed. We both went along with what RO334 wanted, but we ended up with different scenarios. I ended up getting like tortured to death basically by the uprising. You ended up as like a key figure in the uprising and in the victory.
Was there ever like, did the game ever tell you, or like in one of those cards or something, like why the other androids branded you a traitor? Like, is there a specific thing they said, like,
nope,
you decommissioned too many androids, or?
Nope. And that's part of why I was a bit taken aback, slightly unsatisfied by this ending, because I was the one who let their plan go to fruition. In several steps along the way, I aided the revolution. And in RO334's thing, he said, please kill me. And I did. And then they were like, they stormed in. And I assume it's because I decommissioned or memory wiped too many androids that maybe didn't deserve it, or just too many in general. But I definitely did play along with the uprising, and I felt like I was the key to it happening, but they still came in, busted down my door, captured me. Which, it was interesting when that happened, but in a narrative sense, I'm not sure why.
I wonder how much, see, you said you kind of went like on a rogue spree towards the end. Like, do you have a sense of what your like company score was at the end? Because if it was high enough, I wonder if that played a factor. It was just like, look at this employee of the month over here.
That was my other factor that I think might have played into it, where, maybe they saw the company standing and they were like, this motherfucker's got a 74. Let's get him.
Ass kisser.
Yeah, exactly. So that might have been a thing. Although I did think it was funny. I got docked points after the RO334 interrogation because of what happened with the EMP. They blamed me for it, and they took points away from me. Kronos did. And then the uprising comes, and they hate me too. So I was like, fuck me, I guess.
So I wonder if it was like, I wonder if that was established before the RO334 encounter for you. Like, probably. I wonder, like, it almost feels like there is a link between, like, yes, you obliged him when he asked you to make him a martyr, but he did not like fully let you in on his plan with the whole EMP. And so I can see that kind of being, from a certain angle, representative of like, you weren't instrumental in it. RO334 got what he like pulled off his plan without help, right?
Yep.
Whereas like I don't know what it was that I did before that like gained me that trust, but like the fact that he told me, I wonder if that's linked to the other, like the android mob outside seeing me as on their side rather than on Kronos' side.
Right. So I'm looking back at my notes for what I did in all of the interrogations, and probably about halfway through, I started to either go against what Kronos wanted, because there's a couple where Kronos wants you to fill out a false report to just justify what they want. And I stopped doing that. There were a couple where like I recommended something, but Kronos overrode my decision and did something that hurt the android. So maybe I got blamed for that. It might have just been that my company rating was too high. So I did actually write it down. After my performance review, which was the penultimate interrogation, my company rating was 88 out of 100, despite going against Kronos' wishes in a lot of cases. That's part of the reason why I went through this feeling like it was too easy, because I felt like I was fucking around a little bit, and I still had 88 out of 100. So that might have been it.
I'm suddenly very curious about the how many, if any, different ways that performance review encounter can play out, and also the extent, like the role that it plays in how the narrative unfolds. Because I felt like I was riding, I was toeing the line of getting fired the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to that encounter, which it made sense that I was having a performance review conceptually, because I'm like, yeah, I've been a shit employee. Look at all those red marks. But I felt like that encounter was not particularly difficult. Like it felt weirdly easy to just say the right things and to have whoever was interrogating me be like, all right, sounds good, let's move on.
Yep.
Like it didn't feel like that. Like it didn't feel as much like a puzzle to solve as the other encounters. And so I kind of had this weird moment where I was like, what am I supposed to be saying here?
Yeah. I actually, in my performance review, I said exactly what I thought Kronos wanted to hear, because I had started to dick around in the previous like 4 or 5 interrogations. So I thought, I didn't know that this was a scripted review. So when it came up, I was like, oh, fuck, are they catching on to me like supporting this, possible uprising coming? So I was like, I better say exactly what they want me to say. So I'm sure that the company rank plays into what happens at the end, how like the revolutionaries treat you.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt a little bit like, hey man, like I played a big role in this. You wouldn't be in the building if it wasn't for me. So a little bit disappointing in that way. So one interesting thing about the way mine ended is that the uprising worked. And then after you get your ending, with your character, it shows up a summary of what happened to all the characters that you interrogated, including you. You're the last one. What I found was interesting was the uprising worked, but there was no android state set up. What actually happened is that Professor Adder, as a result of the uprising, worked with Kronos to implement better emotional algorithm guidelines for the androids to reduce the risk of deviance. So it worked in that immediate moment, but overall did not work.
We abolished the police and you achieved police reform.
Yes, exactly. But it sounded like it was worded in such a way where it was not altering the emotional algorithm guidelines for the sake of the androids and their emotional well-being. It was, we're going to stamp out future uprisings by changing the way that these are coded, basically.
That doesn't sound like that character.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right?
The way it was,
doesn't sound like out of character for him to help Kronos with something like that.
Perhaps he got scared by what happened and wanted to make sure that it didn't happen again. But it was worded as to reduce the risk of deviance. We're updating the way that this is made.
Ooh. I don't love that phrasing.
Yeah. So that was interesting to me. There were lots of other androids from like the interrogation history that had interesting endings. Like some of them had bad endings. There's some that, like the first one, Alex, that we interrogated. In my game, I sent them in for maintenance. They got their memory wiped, and then they died in the Kronos building during the takeover. So they were part of the uprising. Yeah.
I saw that you had recorded those and I wasn't able to find like any place where I could see those in like, I guess I could maybe relaunch the game and I don't know if it's like saved at the end or if I would be able to play through that last encounter and see them again. But I couldn't find like what those outcomes were for each of my characters. I remember seeing them, but I couldn't like dig them back up.
Right.
So I don't remember all mine.
There were a couple that were kind of fucked up. There was the android who killed a government administrator. It was the first known case of a murder committed by an android. As a result of what happened, they were decommissioned. Their owner was found dead at home. They became a symbol for the android rights movement, and their body, after they were decommissioned, was displayed at Kronos Engineering HQ as a reminder to be perfect in creating the androids. So I was like, Jesus Christ, Kronos sucks.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and especially because that's the one that's like very clearly like a Rick Deckard like stand-in, right? Like he he has the same job.
Oh, no, this one was a caretaker. This was the one with the old man, the one who was getting fucked over by all the red tape in filling out forms and shit.
Oh, that's right. That's right. The other one didn't commit murder. They just like assaulted someone or something.
Right.
Or were seen assaulting someone.
So they were evidently decommissioned by Kronos because I released them in my game to go take care of their owner. Because they said in the interrogation, like, hey, if I'm gone, no one is going to check on this guy. He's going to die. So I was like, you know what? Also, because the reason they killed somebody was that there was a emotion regulator error that made them kill them. So I let them go. Kronos evidently disagreed and decommissioned them. Their owner died as a result. And then they were displayed at Kronos HQ as a reminder to the engineers to do better.
Yeah. Woof. Which is like another thing. This comes up, I think, a couple of other times. But it's always pretty subtle. But like the ways in which, like, if it's not bad enough that you're in charge of making these heavy decisions for the people that are in your chair, the way that like those decisions ripple out, like that's an example of where, like, you know, in this case, was Kronos' decision to override yours, but like it was, you know, the decision of this organization that led to this man dying. Like, and that's like unjust.
Yeah. There is another side of that, how there was AM221, who was the one who was a social worker. When they were released, they hurried up and cleared a bunch of cases to kind of wipe the records of androids that are posing as humans. Those androids were key figures in the storming of the building. So me letting that person go ended up helping the uprising to take over Kronos HQ. So depending on how you feel about androids taking over the building, that was a positive outcome that came from that. Helped a bunch of androids out. So I really liked, like, I don't need to go through all of these results at the end, but I like how they showed you what happened with all of them, and not just because all of them are important for the story. Some of them are not. They're just, you find out what ultimately happened. Like that, the one who wanted to be near their owner's grave got reassigned to construction. Their body gave out. They died a painful death. So it told me that. And I was like, fuck, Kronos.
But you don't know until that, right? Like you come, if that's how you decide to end that encounter, like that's something you feel like you were able to do good. You feel good about that for that whole game. And then at the very end, they're like, just kidding. It was futile.
It was, for that one in particular, it was like, I gave my recommendation, and then in the after report, it says, Kronos is like, yeah, we see your recommendation. We're not doing that. She's going to construction. So, and then at the end, so you kind of know, like, this isn't going to go well. And then at the end, they're like, it did not go well. It was exactly how you thought it would be.
And it did not.
Yeah. And then the last one is my character, the final person on this kind of results slideshow they show you. My character was killed by an angry mob of android rights supporters and is remembered fondly by some. So the androids that I helped remember me fondly, but apparently I didn't help enough of them because they killed me.
Right. Yeah. I like I said, I wasn't able to dig up exactly what mine was, but you know, knowing that, you know, I had the outcome where the android state was founded and there was maybe some tense human android relations still lingering, I have to assume it was probably kind of similar where, like, I don't know, maybe the androids, I was like well remembered by androids, but less so by humans. But I don't recall if it said anything about, you know, what I did with the rest of my life, or if I had any sort of official role in the android state or whatever. Like, I'm fuzzy on that.
Yeah. So I said I was kind of like dissatisfied by my ending, or kind of snuck up on me in a way. And the one thing that I thought about that kind of rationalized that is that throughout most of the game, we kind of praised how you get this this interesting, unique perspective on the uprising, being that you're never leaving your room, basically. And so you just hear about what's going on and you take part in it. If you choose to. We both obviously chose to take part in it. But you're not on the front lines, like I said earlier. And so you start to feel this disconnect. Like, I wrote down that this reminded me of like checking Twitter or watching the news or something and them talking about the war in Ukraine. And like, I want to support Ukraine in this, but I'm a dude in my room recording a podcast. I'm not over there. I am disconnected. This is not affecting me if I'm lucky. And I am lucky. And in this game, it was that way for a long time. And then suddenly...
And then all at once,
they're pounding on my door. And I was like, oh, shit. Like it's interesting how I got this false sense of safety where like, yeah, I can do this. My company rating is good. It's something I actually wrote down in the notes. I can do this because my company rating is good. I'll be fine. And then suddenly shit hit the fan. My character was not fine. That's something that happens to real people when there's, conflicts like this. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like, fuck, this snuck up on me. I felt like I did my part. I still died. But when I lay it out that way, it starts to make more sense in a way that I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think this game is very critical of a lot of like real world, the inherent like bias and unfairness of like real world social systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I think a lot of what it feels like we've both been kind of like working this out in real time in this conversation, but like a lot of what feels frustrating during the gameplay, like you really come to appreciate as like a well-designed reflection of the things that the game is of the themes that the game is playing with.
Mm-hmm.
And like in that sense, it's like it is unfair how low of a limit there is on like a positive to negative outcome ratio, right?
Yeah.
Where like even like you can imagine the real world person who like works for a big corporation and thinks that they're like the good guy that's like trying to affect change from within, and they're doing that by pursuing good standing with their company, and like that's the route you played, and you saw how it ends, right? Like there are trade-offs to that. It's not that is like was inherently the wrong move. It's that every move that you could make has its trade-offs.
Mm-hmm.
I would be surprised if there was any, and I don't know how many endings, like possible endings there are to the game, but I would be surprised if there was any of them that were presented as just like unilaterally good, just sunshine and rainbows, everybody lived happily ever after, and all injustice was eliminated.
Right, exactly.
I would be surprised if there was an ending like that.
Yeah. It sounded like you got the closest to a really good ending because you did affect change. Androids did get their rights, but you pissed off a bunch of humans, and this conflict is going to continue. It's not like it's a happy ending and the humans are all like, you know what, those androids, they had a really good point, and I changed my mind. And Kronos is like, you know what?
I've got some stuff to unpack.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff to really introspect on.
Yeah. And then if you go the totally opposite route and you go the way that ends the cleanest for your character, which is probably to quell the uprising and just continue to do a good job for Kronos, that doesn't feel good either.
No, and based on how the writing is throughout the game, I'm sure the writing would make you feel bad about it too.
Yeah, probably.
Even though they, probably drive home the point that your character is fine.
Yeah. So this is it's a really cool game, and I actually this is not a huge surprise to me, but I'm coming out of this recording much more positive than I already was on the game. Just hearing your experience and how it was different from mine, and the ways that it was different from mine was really fucking cool. And
yeah,
so like I started this recording being like, this game's cool, everyone should try it, it's a neat game. And then as we talk through our experiences and kind of work our way through it, I'm like, no, actually this is really fucking good. I think a lot more people should play this.
Yeah, I think I agree, and I think I'm also coming out of like when we're done here, when we hang up here, like my mind is revved up on this game more than it has been since the day I finished it. And I probably, if you would have asked me earlier today if I was ever going to go back and spend much time exploring some of the stuff I didn't uncover, I probably would have said no. And that's not this game. That's I think I like. When dialogue heavy, narrative driven games, even if they are structured in a way that closes off information to me because of the choices I've made, makes me feel okay ending the game and putting it down, and like leaves me without that compulsion to go back and like 100% it, right? Make sure I've seen every possible path. And and I still don't necessarily think I feel that way about this game. I'm not going to go back and crawl through it and to find everything. But, I earlier today, I was like, no, I'm pretty like content with just being the story I got. And I am, but I am also now suddenly much more curious about different ways things can unfold. Because I'm starting to think that there are maybe a wider variety of them than I even realized or than I even assumed just having this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that our two endings and our stories kind of were similar, but pretty different in a lot of ways, makes me feel that if we brought in two other people into this recording, we would get two other pretty different experiences, and that's really cool. And I am cool with my story, and I appreciate a game that has the confidence to just be like, that's your story, that's how it ended, and I didn't start a new thing, but I wonder if you load it back up, if you load it, it will be like, your story is over, you start a new story if you want a new story, but you're not going to like go in that last encounter and try to do it differently just to get a different ending.
I don't think you can. I think your ending is probably the result of groundwork laid across the entire game.
Yeah, which
like,
is cool.
I think maybe some of the first and second act encounters you could probably play in isolation and explore different outcomes. But I think if you wanted to explore different outcomes of the entire game, you'd probably have to start from scratch.
Yeah, and that's cool. It's
I agree.
I would much rather have the game lay the groundwork from the first encounter that you think doesn't matter, but actually you are starting to, like you said, lay the groundwork for how your story is going to play out, instead of you reach the 85% point in the game and then they're like, all right, pick your ending.
Right, exactly. A or B.
Yeah. So this has been awesome, man. I really appreciate you taking the time again to talk about this with me. I appreciate you taking a chance on a game that you hadn't heard of and playing it. And I'm happy that you enjoyed it. And I'm really happy with how this conversation went.
Yeah, man, it's been illuminating. And like I said, I appreciate the opportunity to try it. I think it was so much better than I could have hoped. And it's not that I was expecting anything bad anyway. And it was so much fun. I do want to call out, I briefly mentioned it because I was wrong about who you were talking about, but I do got to shout out my boy R1982. I think encounter number 5, maybe. Right. He is a recall android, and I think a very direct homage to Rick Deckard from Blade Runner. And in fact, I only
wrote
just
in the notes Sam Decker. So apparently I didn't remember much about Blade Runner.
I only just noticed this today as I was going back through this, but 1982 is when Blade Runner came out. And I figure R could probably stand for anything. Rick, Ridley,
Recall,
Runner, yeah. Recall, yeah, Replicant. But I think that's a pretty funny little nod to Blade Runner. But
yeah,
man,
really nice.
Awesome conversation, awesome game. Great job. Clockwork Bird, is that what you said they were called? Clockwork Bird?
Clockwork Bird.
Yeah, awesome game. Totally worth the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Highly recommend.
Yeah, so that'll be it for this episode. Scott, thanks again for coming on. Thank you one last time to Clockwork Bird for reaching out and giving us codes. Really, really like this. So thank you everybody for listening. Stay tuned next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.